How's it going, you guys? So in this video, I'm going to be answering a question I got on one of my recent videos. This video is going to be about dairy. So let me read the person's question really quick. So one of my subscribers named HitchDH asks, what do you think about dairy? Now everywhere there is evidence of dairy being unhealthy, and that humans only started consuming it recently, and most people react to it. But non-dairy calcium is basically sardines, salmon, nuts, seeds, and greens. Did humans really only consume these foods for calcium? I'm Tunisian, which is like a Mediterranean region, and we consume a lot of sardines. But dairy is still a huge part of the traditional diet. I can consume fresh sardines, but can the rest of the world consume fresh sardines as well? Because canned sardines equals histamine. Nuts, seeds, greens equals just look at a vegan. Salmon can't feed 8 billion people plus the bears. I know your advice is consuming bone meal, but I don't really understand why. Why would someone crush bones instead of milking cows, goats, yaks, camels, and their version of these animals in every country? So I don't get it. And who is Ray Pete? Okay, so let's see. So first of all, I don't believe that. So there's a couple parts to this question. So I'll start with calcium. So basically, I think one of the underarching questions of this question is, where exactly did human beings evolve to get their calcium from? So if you look at the composition of mineral water, okay, and I mean actual mineral water, which probably closely resembles some of the water that humans might have gotten from streams and rivers and whatnot, other than the pathogens that probably came in that water, you'll find that there's a lot of minerals like calcium and even salt like sodium, calcium, sodium, magnesium, boron. There's a lot of minerals in spring water, actually came from a spring, or actually river water and stuff like that, because all these rocks, there's a lot of rocks and soil and algae, basically vegetables, I guess you can think, but not really. But there's plants and things that soak in this water and obviously enrich it with minerals. And so a lot of the minerals you might get from rock salt or soil, which gives the minerals that we get to vegetables. But essentially all of these minerals from the rocks and the plants and things enrich the water with minerals. And so where I'm getting at here is one major source of calcium in the natural human diet would be water, getting it from spring water and whatnot. So I think there can be up to like 100 milligrams of calcium in a liter of heavily enriched mineral water, but I'm probably mistaking it. So I think that's probably one source of a lot of these minerals that we talk about. And here in our modern society, water is free, but it comes with fluoride and chlorine and all this other crap that is put into the water, partly to offset the rust and pathogens and stuff that come from our modern supply. So there's one huge thing. So obviously we have to heavily filter and purify our water to render it drinkable. And when we do that, we lose a lot of the calcium and magnesium and stuff that would normally come along with it. So that's one source of calcium. The other thing is, so there's a lot of evidence that human beings actually have at least chewed on bones and gnawed on bones, for millions of years. Because we found tooth marks and things on fossils and whatnot. But then also, if you really want to get to the bottom of this is why I recommend the book Nourishing Diets by Sally Fallon, which summarizes a lot of Weston Price's research and other research from, the last like 300 years of indigenous people who have not yet been modernized or touched by modern food practices. and it talks a lot about how certain indigenous people would boil down bones. They literally boil their food. That was their main cooking method, and they boil down bones. They'd also milk, like for example, in the Eskimo population, they would milk down certain ice water to create salt water for themselves, but only specific, very specific, picked out ice water they boil down so that they don't get like salt toxicity. So that was how they would get their sodium, and they'd boil down bones. So that is, one thing. So this idea that, human beings have not eaten bones is not necessarily true. And then also that book talks a lot about dairy, and a lot of these indigenous people, how they, they've actually, what would you say, domesticated animals themselves and brought them with them and milked animals. And the big thing that we have to understand here is, number one, human beings are not the only organisms that consume another animal's milk. That's not true. That's based on speculation rather than facts. And if you look on YouTube, you can find a number of videos of, like cats drinking from a goat's udder, and, pigs drinking from a cow's udder. And you can find examples of animals drinking the milk of a completely other species' milk or whatever. So you can actually find videos of that. And as far as dairy being unhealthy, the evidence suggests processed milk, pasteurized milk is not the same as raw milk. That's the first thing. There are actually enzymes in raw milk that help humans digest lactose. So there's the lactase enzyme is present in raw milk. And so people who are lactose intolerant, they might go and drink the Lactaid milk, but that Lactaid milk's not necessarily lactose free. It actually generally contains lactose, but it also contains the lactase enzyme that's required to digest the milk. And so lactose intolerant people generally drink raw milk just fine because it contains the same enzyme that Lactaid milk has. Okay? So human beings, generally, the majority of them that think that they just can't drink milk and they think it's genetic, it has to do with they're not drinking raw milk. If they drink raw milk, they'll probably be okay. Now, beyond that, lactose is not the only thing in milk that causes intolerances. There's also intolerances to proteins in milk, such as casein protein. I made a video about this before. If you drink, I believe it's A1 cow milk, the casein protein can cause mood imbalances and respiratory issues. Like for me, my nose gets really constricted if I take in a lot of dairy protein. And I think that's specific to A1. Some people are only intolerant to A1 casein protein from milk, but if they drink milk from A2 cows, they're okay. And the same thing can be said about, if you drink goat milk or sheep milk, you might actually not have the same problems. So the other thing is antibiotic use could easily, cause intolerances to different foods, including dairy, that other people wouldn't have. And there is a possibility that, some people are just genetically susceptible to the effects of milk. And so it could be heavily individualized. And we're talking about intolerances here. Now, when we talk about dairy causing cancer and stuff like that, there's really no conclusive evidence of a causal relationship between dairy and cancer and other health issues. And in some cases, dairy is actually directly correlated with better health outcomes. So most people that believe dairy causes cancer, they think about IGF-1 and some of these growth hormones and things. But I actually have the book, The China Study, sitting over here. Let me get it real quick. Let's see. Here it is. So, sure, I'm a keto guy, right? You could say. I'm not really a keto guy, but I do follow ketogenic protocols. And I still have this book, The China Study, right? The China Study talks about an experiment done on rats where they basically they fed rats alpha toxin, a known carcinogen, and they induced tumors in rats. And they showed if they gave the rats isolated casein protein, which is, a main dairy protein, and super high amounts, so they could speed the growth of tumors alongside a carcinogen. And then they also compared the rats to ones who had pea protein isolate or whatever. And they found that the pea protein isolate doesn't accelerate the growth of tumors as much as the isolated casein protein from dairy. But of course, there's a number of problems with that. Number one, they're feeding the rats heavy doses of carcinogens. Number two, they're giving the rats high doses of casein protein that's been isolated from dairy. And so if you're a human and you're consuming a raw milk as a whole food, it's not going to have the same effects as superological doses of casein protein isolated administered alongside a carcinogen. The point here is that the studies done showing dairy products increasing the risk of cancer. And mind you, a lot of vegans, they use this study as proof that animal protein in general causes cancer. That's so shaky, and I just don't believe it. But if I'm wrong, post a study down below that shows a causal link between dairy protein and cancer, and I'll read it. So as far as non-dairy calcium, so you mentioned nut seeds and greens. Okay, so there's actually studies done on raw vegans. That there's actually a intervention or a cohort study done on raw vegans that show significantly lowered bone mass in raw vegans. And typically the only calcium that raw vegans would be getting is from greens, nuts, and seeds if they choose to eat them, unless they're fruitarians, which is even worse. So lowered bone mass from, a group of people who their only calcium source is nuts, seeds, and greens. And I'll try to find that study and link it in the description, but I'm lazy and probably won't get around to it. But there is a study out there that shows that. The second thing is you have to understand that the bioavailability of the calcium found in nuts and seeds is not very great. And it does contain anti-nutrients as well that inhibit the absorption of calcium from those foods. So while nuts and seeds might be high in calcium, first of all, those foods tend to be very hard to digest for a lot of people. For me, I just shit those nuts and seeds right out, and even if I soak them and sprout them. Second thing is, even if you do manage to digest parts of those nuts and seeds, you'll have anti-nutrients that block the absorption of the calcium. And then greens, typically, they have a high bioavailability of calcium, especially things like broccoli, even cooked. But you'd have to consume a ton of broccoli to get enough calcium. And it also depends on how much calcium you think you need. There's some people that believe you only need 500 milligrams a day of calcium as long as you have enough magnesium and vitamin D to enhance the absorption of calcium. But you still have to eat approximately 6 cups of cooked broccoli to get that much calcium. And I believe that's quite a lot of broccoli. You probably have severe gastrointestinal issues if you ate that much broccoli. But maybe it's possible. I would say bone meal in a modern time, I could just take 1 teaspoon of bone meal a day, and I'm getting about 800 milligrams of calcium from that bone meal. And that should be plenty. And I would be willing to bet that the calcium I'm getting from the bone meal is way superior in absorption and bioavailability from the calcium I might get from greens, nuts, seeds, and broccoli. And the other thing is, from an evolutionary standpoint, do you really think human beings went out of their way to get greens, like leaves from a tree, to get their calcium intake? so green vegetables of all kinds, leaves, broccoli, they don't really provide a whole lot of survival benefit. Why is that? Well, because number one, human beings cannot digest cellulose. And the bacteria in our guts that can digest some of these plants and the cellulose, they convert them into fatty acids anyway, short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which our body can produce when we fast. Or if we eat butter, is a source of butyrate. And so, herbivorous animals convert cellulose into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. They're pretty much running on a ketogenic metabolism in a sense. The point here, though, is human beings can't actually produce usable energy from cellulose, and so the amount of caloric energy that we need to survive, okay, we need caloric energy. It's our main reason for seeking food in the first place, is so low that it makes no sense that human beings would be seeking out green vegetables for calcium intake. Okay? We would die. We would not exist right now if that was our survival strategy. And I think that this is also, there's a scientific term known as optimal foraging strategy, I think. And it talks about this. There's such low caloric energy that it would kill us off if we strived and if we put that much energy into getting green plants for calcium, and we can't even absorb most of it as what dietary fiber is. So it wouldn't make sense for humans to have evolved to get calcium from green vegetables. But in our modern times, maybe it's feasible. Nuts and seeds, I personally you won't find me eating those, because what's the purpose of seeds, of eating seeds? So seeds are found in fruits. Fruits have a very high energy density, and they definitely spark our taste buds in a way that makes me believe human beings evolved to be eating fruits. I think that fruits are meant to be eaten. And when you consume fruits, you consume the seeds too. When you consume the seeds have enzyme inhibitors that are meant to bypass human digestion, so we can just shit seeds out with our poop. Do you know what fertilizer is? Fertilizer is poop. Manure. So literally, seeds are designed to be pooped out so that the fruit can continue its genetic evolution and continue to grow and survive. So fruits want you to be eaten so that their seeds can be spread throughout the world. But the thing is, seeds are not meant to be digested. They're meant to be fertilized in the soil when you poop them out, which is probably why I can't digest them to save my life. And that leads me to believe that they're probably not a very good source of calcium unless you prepare them the way indigenous people did, which is sprouting, soaking, and pounding them into mush. And then usually it take 2 to 9 days to prepare beans, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. And I believe this is a huge reason why human beings now, there's such a big epidemic of, intestinal permeability and gut dysbiosis, at least in America, because we don't prepare these whole grains the way that we need to. And that's the reason why Asians don't eat brown rice, or they don't eat brown rice, they eat white rice, because brown rice has enzyme inhibitors that cause nutritional deficiencies and are hard to digest. Point here is, I don't believe nuts and seeds ever were meant to be evolved as our calcium source, and neither do I believe greens do. And really, if you think greens are such a great calcium source and are meant to be eaten by humans, how come, I don't know about in Tunisia, I don't know about in the Mediterranean, but here in America, we spend $6 a pound on organic spinach when we could just go out to the trees and eat, leaves from a tree. I know that they're not the same thing, but we actually hybridize those green vegetables to be edible over thousands of years. So in nature, we don't really go out and eat these green vegetables. So as a calcium source, again, from an evolutionary standpoint, doesn't make sense. From a rational, logical, modern standpoint, Maybe it's feasible, but I don't think it makes sense. So fresh sardines don't contain histamine, but canned sardines might. But mind you, histamine issues are not a problem for everyone living in the world. I don't get that I know of. I might get histamine reactions from sardines, and I might just not be aware of it. But I think a lot of people, they can eat canned sardines just fine without histamine issues. But remember, the calcium found in sardines is from the bones. So I don't know why you would be separating sardines and salmon as a calcium source from bone meal. The reason why sardines and salmon are such a great source of calcium is because of the bones that they contain. It's just that they're so tiny you don't notice them, and you can eat them just fine. Human beings have been eating bugs. Then they've been eating fish, small birds, and all sorts of things for millions of years. When you eat a bug, you're eating the bones and the structure of the bug too, which contains a lot of calcium. So human beings have been eating bones or from bugs, and getting our calcium from that for thousands and millions of years. So I mean, small animals that contain bones, we don't think of sardines as bone meal, but that's where the calcium comes from. So what I'm getting at here is, I don't think dairy causes all the diseases that vegans will have you believe. It hasn't been shown to actually, for sure cause health problems. And also some of the blue zones, like where you live, Sardinia, Tunisia, all the Mediterranean countries, like Crete, they're very high. They've always had very high dairy consumption, and they also have some of the longest living centenarians on the planet, if you believe in their birth certificates. But they eat a diet mostly of whole foods, or they did when the Blue Zone data was collected. I don't think it's dairy that's causing, chronic health problems. I think it's high amounts of, grain consumption that's not balanced with protein, omega-3 fatty acids, and things like that. I think if you eat a diet of fish, olive oil, and whole grains, you should be fine, and you should experience similar benefits to what the Blue Zones experience, even if you consume dairy. But if you're like the ancient Egyptians who had heart disease, and you ate a diet that is abundant in whole wheat without protein and other things to balance it out, you're probably going to have insulin resistance over time, and you're probably going to develop heart disease and all sorts of health issues, just like the ancient Egyptians did. The other question, salmon can't feed 8 billion people plus the bears. Salmon, again, they get their calcium from the bones that are in the salmon. That's the first thing. The second thing is, salmon can't feed 8 billion people plus the bears. And I believe most bears are mostly herbivorous also. So, but the thing is, if we're talking about health outcomes, then salmon feeding 8 billion people and the bears is irrelevant to health outcomes. We're talking about sustainability. Believe me when I say, if there's enough meat to give high quality protein to 8 billion people, there's more than enough bone meal. The majority of carcasses and bones and stuff are just thrown out, or they're used in byproducts. Bone meal can sustain the majority of the population if you do regenerative agriculture. Make sure you read the book Sacred Cow by Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers. But salmon can't. Nuts, seeds, and greens, you're looking at a pretty unhealthy population if you ask me. Bone meal and moderate amounts of animal protein can definitely sustain the world, and and I believe dairy, for those who can actually digest it, can also sustain a healthy population. But 8 billion people is a lot of people. The good thing, I guess you could say, in a nihilistic fashion, is that, you know, there's going to be a lot of natural selection. Like people who just don't want to eat healthy, who just eat like refined sugar and junk, which is easily sustainable, I guess. Not really, it's killing our environment. And so there's going to be a lot of genetic die-off from all of the junk food people are eating. It's creating genetic illnesses, like a lot of the like type 2 diabetes that's being passed on, and heart disease that's being passed on, or our susceptibility and our increased risk based on genetics. It has nothing to do with like heredity. It has everything to do with the generations before them eating junk foods and creating nutritional deficiencies, and they're destroying their DNA and genetics that they're passing on to the next generation. So over time, you're going to see genetic die-off, in my opinion, and it's going to bring the population back down to a more manageable, something that's more manageable. I can't really say if it's a conspiracy or something, but what I can say is that it definitely seems like that's going to happen. So hopefully that's answered this question in deep detail. You know, I don't think dairy is bad. I think bone meal is probably optimal. The calcium in salmon and sardines is from bones. And nuts, seeds, and greens, probably not a good idea. So leave a question in the comments down below, and if you disagree with me, that's fine. Make sure you provide supporting evidence. I'll talk to y'all next time.